This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, episode number 141. Again, we are transcontinental.
Yes, we are.
All right, Tim, I don't know if you've heard about this, but I'm a little bit concerned. Independent testing has found hundreds of popular personal care items in the US, to be contaminated with benzene, highly carcinogenic chemical, prompting finally several big brands to voluntarily recall dozens of products in recent months. So the lab that investigated this, Valashore, they detected benzene in hand sanitizers, sunscreens. I never use sunscreen because I do think it causes cancer. Deodorants, never use it. Dry shampoos, conditioners, antiperspirants, body sprays, and antifungal treatments. So the contamination has been most frequently detected in aerosol or spray products. Okay. Summit levels, the Food and Drug Administration characterizes finally life-threatening. Benzene, quote unquote, shouldn't be in there at all. What we're seeing is a fundamental problem in the manufacturing of a lot of consumer products. Now, to date, Valashore has tested 662 items and found the chemical in about 27% of the products. Now, what products do you think they're in? Please, let me illustrate. Procter & Gamble, Bayer, CVS, Johnson & Johnson. Well, they've issued voluntary recalls for widely distributed brands, including, and these all suck anyway, Brute, Sure, Pantene, Herbal Essence, Old Spice, Secret, Tenactin, Lotrimin, Coppertone, Neutrogena, and Aveeno, which claims to be organic. Now, among the recalled hand sanitizer brands are Art Naturals, Best Brands, and Natural Wonders. So after decades of research, like we didn't know this, they have found that no safe levels of benzene exposure. There are no safe levels because it's so toxic. So the petroleum-based chemical, quote unquote, causes cancer, especially leukemia and in blood-forming organs. The toxin has also been shown to harm the central nervous system and reproductive organs. Now, supposedly benzene was banned 45 years ago, because it's established to be incredibly toxic. But recently, advocates took aim at the Food and Drug Administration, probably all on the take, for failing to do more to protect the public. Look, they're going to kill us one way or another. We know this. So in December, a statement, the agency said it was investigating this. We're investigating the situation 45 years after benzene has been banned. Now, most frequently, benzene is found in body sprays, Axe, and of course, the highest levels were found in Sure, Old Spice, Secret, Equate, Right Guard, Tag, and Brute. Also, they tested 300 sunscreens or after sun products. And, this is why my skin, since I don't use sunblocks or sunscreen, is as delightful as it is. So they found detectable levels in about 30% of the samples. Neutrogena, supposedly, good for you, CVS, Sunbroom, Raw Elements, Banana Boat. So although spray on sunscreen was found to be contaminated most frequently, the chemical was also detected in lotions and gels. Most worrying, Valashore found that hand sanitizers have the highest levels of benzene. And the thing is, they've investigated it because of the demand for products spiking. So out of 260 samples from 168 brands sold on Amazon and at pharmacies and Target, about 20% had detectable levels of benzene. Purell, Suave, they didn't contain the chemical. So in December, a statement by TPC Hot Acquisitions, which owns Brute and Sure, wrote, to date, no reports of adverse events related to this recall have been reported. The voluntary recall is being conducted. Of course it does. So it takes 10 to 15 years. So I'm sorry to say, if you have mothers, sisters, brothers, fathers, as we all do, who have died or are dying of cancer, maybe it's because they tried to be so clean.
Well, I thought a lot of dermatologists with sunscreen, a lot of them kind of basically checked off on the spray-on ones, and they went more mineral based as opposed to chemical based.
Look, stay out of the sun for too long a period. Right. We all need vitamin D, but almost all of this crap is carcinogenic. I mean, the amount of chemicals that women in our search to just look a little bit, how can we help it, better than the male of the species, and all the cosmetics and pampering we do. I mean, it's no wonder the uprising in breast cancer is at
here's
such
a positive
an outlandish rate.
Here's a positive thing that's happening. These scientists in France have found that okra.
I love okra.
Is like the best way to remove microplastics from water, and that they've been using these things called flocculants for years, specifically things like polyacrylamide, all these chemicals to remove it, but then that creates all these other problems.
Right.
And so they're finding
okra.
They kind of went back into like. They went to the Cajun kitchen,
Yes.
basically.
Welcome home, honey.
They're finding that okra absorbs these microplastics.
Oh my gosh.
Better than anything. So,
by the way, Tim, just as a subside, I just made my own Cajun spice the other day, and it was damn delish. Go ahead.
Well, the thing about okra, because you're good with the okra.
I love okra.
When I was a kid, my mom was
trying to clear out my own microplastics.
Well, there you go. I was like, what is this mucus vegetable? But
it
has to be prepared right, and you use properly in soups or fried.
Now they have to be breaded and lightly. I don't deep fry anything. They have to be lightly breaded and that crunchy, delicious. And now cleaning out the microplastics in my colon. I love it.
But staying on the vegetable topic, Samantha Baldwin thought, she was in her little garden and she was quote saying, "It just wasn't behaving like a potato should." And she was like, "Holy crap, look at the size of this thing." She ends up digging up at least what she thought was a 17-pound potato. And she, of course, her and her husband named it Doug, D-U-G. And they entered it into the Guinness Book of World Records.
The World Potato Records.
Yeah, well, the biggest one.
By the way, I always love to follow the biggest pumpkin around Halloween because I love pumpkins. Those grow huge.
Those get insane. But then GBWW, Guinness Book of World Records, denied them because they have a whole staff, and they found out genetically it was not a potato.
What was Doug?
Some type of gourd. It grew right next to their potato, so they didn't understand. It looks like a potato, but it's not a potato. So they're bummed, but they're not done with Doug.
Probably be eating that bastard for a couple of years.
They have plans for Doug. they would have. Whoa! Someone.
What's going on?
It's got this construction going down, but they start early in the morning, and then I get it, 9 to 5, you got to do your shit.
All right,
it's close to 6 o'clock, and they're banging around.
Satanic Slater.
It's like turned this place into a fucking nightmare all day long. I'm about to lose it.
Well,
you have lost it.
Like
you have. Can we finish?
All right, 5 o'clock, time to go home.
We got to keep this in. All
right. Satanic Slater has just had a tantrum. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, they're going to going back to Doug, D-U-G, their pet gourd. They're going to transform Doug into some kind of vodka. They're going to make vodka out of it.
Okay.
So it's not all gone to waste at all.
Well, there's nothing like a good gourd.
Yeah, exactly.
Or good gore, actually. So.
There you go. I have other stories. I don't know if you want to.
No, I don't. So as a matter of fact, I'm going to tie it up, Timmy, because this is something that's really bugging me, and it leads into our next guest, Tim McLoughlin, our alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And this is kind of pissing. Well, I'm kind of interested. I don't know what to say about this. The South Carolina Department of Corrections said that it can now carry out executions by firing squad in the state should death row inmates choose the method. The department said that it had completed renovations on the death chamber at the Broad River Correctional Institution, had established actual protocols making it able to conduct such executions. So it was that genius Henry McMaster, South Carolina governor, and by the way, home of Lindsay Grand Central Station, a Republican. It was last year that Governor Henry McMaster signed a bill into law that made the electric chair the state's primary means of execution, but allowed inmates the option instead to choose firing squad or lethal injection if available. What I don't get is they fuck up lethal injection so often. Give them a good fucking hot shot and take them. Give them some fentanyl. It's over in like 30 seconds. But the change was made to South Carolina law as states around the country hit barriers executing those on death row due to problems administering lethal injections.
Oh boy.
Widely preferred method. I mean, the thing is, they bust so many people from minute amounts of drugs, but they can't give someone a correct lethal injection.
They shouldn't have death penalty at all.
Well, the department detailed of course. I mean, what do you expect? The department detailed the room setup and protocols for how a firing squad execution, why is it in a room and not outside, would be carried out. An inmate would be strapped into a chair with a hood placed over their head, and a member of the execution team would place a small aim over the person's heart, and the rifles used by the 3-member firing squad will not be visible to the witnesses. What fun is that? Members of the firing squad must meet certain qualifications, and they're volunteer department.
Oh, of course, they're
employees.
sickos. They're sickos.
And the department in South Carolina spent about $53,600 to make the necessary changes to accommodate firing squad executions. Right now, there are 35 men on death row in South Carolina, and unfortunately, Lindsey Graham is not one of them. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and our guest, Tim McLoughlin. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Tim McLoughlin, who's going to read us a passage from his fantastic new book, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. 3 things I've got my own opinion about. Tim, would you please bless us with a reading?
Sure. This is called Indigenous. When I found my mother dead on the kitchen floor, the first thing I thought was how different everything would be if I hadn't gone back to get my handcuffs. Selfish, I know, but I hadn't had a roofing job in a month, and I'd broken another tooth last Thursday. I was hurting all the time, and I really missed having a dental plan. She was halfway under the kitchen table on her back. It seemed like she was looking out the window. She must have been up and about for a while when it happened. She had today's Post open on the table, and 2 cigarette butts lay in the ashtray, smoked so thoroughly to the filters that they looked like earplugs. 1 piece of dark toast remained on her plate, and I could smell the whiskey in the dregs of her tea. I'd had a rough night and slept late. If there had been anything to hear, I hadn't heard it. I hope there wasn't. The day's mail was next to her plate, and I recognized the green ink on the return address of the window pane envelope on top. I took her Social Security check and folded it and put it in my pocket. Julio would open the liquor store at noon and cash it, as he always did. I looked around the room. I was born here 40 years ago. I grew up here, then moved out and got a job and got married and got fired and got divorced and moved back. Seemed like there should be more to it than that, but really there wasn't. The small white octagonal floor tiles were identical to those in the bar at the Knights of Columbus on Van Brunt Street, where my parents held my christening party and where I'd had my wedding reception. The Knights folded about 6 months ago, unable to keep up with the mounting rents in Red Hook. I would have to move now too. This lease was in my mother's name, and ours was the last rent-controlled apartment in the building. The landlord had already gotten most of the blacks and Puerto Ricans and old Irish out, and was stocking the place with yuppies. Manhattan people, we called them, or just the new people. I left then, went down 3 flights and hit the street and walked. In the summer of 1997, I graduated from the police academy. That night, about a dozen of us wound up in Coney Island, pretty drunk by 2 a.m. It seemed funny. I handcuffed the ride operator to his ticket booth, and we hijacked the Wonder Wheel. We let the pretty girls ride free and stopped and started it when we felt like it, and someone brought more beer. When they caught us, there was a lot of press. Somebody had to swing. The rest of my friends almost had their 20 in now, and they were all living upstate or in Jersey. I'd gone back for my handcuffs. I stepped into the new place where the nights had been. It was unbearably bright. They just opened, and the only people there were the bartender and a couple having coffee at the bar. The room was newly painted and scrubbed clean and smelled of polyurethane instead of beer. I ordered a drink and remembered standing outside with the old timers a few years ago, laughing at the city road crew as they painted a double yellow line down the street for the first time. "Where you from?" the bartender asked. He was young and fit. He looked intelligent. He looked like he had sex with attractive women. He looked like he had a future. There must be a word, I thought, a way to tell him. I was angry suddenly. I wanted to smack him just for talking to me, just for being in this place. I wanted to smack him for the plants in the window and the missing jukebox and the flat screen television and the $6 beer. And I felt ashamed. My mother was dead on the floor and I was back in a bar, and now I'd spent my last $6. My tongue kept cutting itself on the new broken tooth and it hurt, and I felt like I couldn't talk. "You okay, dude?" he asked. Standing still, I said. "What?" "Not moving." I felt dizzy and the words weren't coming out right. I was starting to cry. I wiped my eyes and saw the thick black lines of grime under my fingernails and looked away, down at the polished wood floor where the white octagonal tiles had been. I thought about the blacks and the Puerto Ricans and the Italians and the fights and the parties, and how when we were kids we would play along the pier on the corner at Erie Basin, pretending we were Indians watching the first white men arrive. I was sobbing now and my head hurt. The couple with coffee was looking at me and I didn't care. "From here," I screamed, "from here."
Thank you.
All right.
Let's talk about this all for a minute. You're a lifer, meaning kind of a New York lifer, and it's obvious in whether it's fiction or nonfiction that you're writing. And it is very reminiscent to me of, my literary hero and who I was very lucky to tour with, Hubert Selby Jr., in the sense that it paints such an accurate picture of the downside of what New York once was, and to some degree still is, and is going back to.
Yes, all that. And Selby was, as obviously you realize, he was an extraordinary influence on me. Selby and Gilbert Sorrentino were the two big New York influences. And other than that, Raymond Chandler. But yeah, it took, it's my, I'm going to mispronounce this, but, cri de coeur of the Brooklyn dinosaur, watching what is falling away these days.
And watching what's also returning as far as the crime.
Yeah.
And this is something I want to talk to you about, because you, like I came to New York in 76. People have no idea what the crime and the destruction was like then. And were you born in Brooklyn?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a newcomer, according to you. And people have
my take on Brooklyn is like Keith Richards on the Rolling Stones, the newest, the guy that came in 1975 is the new guy.
I'm the new guy. I'm the newbie. I came in 76. I'm the newbie, but I went right to Avenue A, B, C, and D. So whatever.
That's true.
What's interesting now, or horrifying actually, is the amount of crime that's happening, random bullshit crime in New York and probably all over not all over the country and all over the world right now. I mean, we had a lull for a while, I guess. I don't know why. And what do you think about that? As somebody who you worked, and the quote is, as a peace officer, and we'll go into that, in the criminal justice system for 30 years, you weren't a police officer though.
No.
Right. But you worked in the court system in a variety of.
Yeah, I started as a court officer in uniform, which meant essentially monitoring the courtrooms, but it also meant running prisoners from the pens, the central correction pens, down to the courtrooms and back again, which in lower criminal court back in the early 1980s was an extraordinarily busy place.
I can imagine.
It was the busiest felony courthouse on earth in 1983.
How often did you come across dangerous situations in the courthouse?
Relatively speaking, every day.
Okay.
Although more often on Fridays. Friday used to be in the bad old days what we called 180-80 day, which meant that after, I think it was 6 full days, if somebody was not indicted, they had to be cut loose. So that was when your calendar would be packed. And prior to when they opened up the drug parts, all the felonies went through one courtroom. So it would not be unusual for a Friday in 1983 or 84 for you to have 195 cases on the calendar, and 100 of them were jails. So the whole concept that you see in the movies of 2 guys going up to get one defendant and bring him downstairs was just goofy. We packed as many people into the elevator as we could, daisy chained them, and then got on there with them. And then when you were halfway down, realized, well, this is a stupid thing to do. But you had to get through your day. So you did that 8, 9, 10 times.
What made you even decide to go into that kind of work?
White Irish outer borough kid with no predilection for crime, never particularly fond of academia.
I mean, how rough was Red Hook? You're around crime probably just as a youth, right? Because you were living in Red Hook.
I actually didn't move to Red Hook until I was an adult, but my father's family is from Red Hook, and I still had family out there when I moved back out there. But I lived in Bay Ridge, Bensonhurst, which back in
I live in Bensonhurst now.
Do you really?
Yeah, I'm not there right now, but I live in Bensonhurst right now. Yes, and I've always lived in South Brooklyn. I lived I lived in Midwood near Marine Park. So, South Brooklyn is where I've always lived since I've lived in New York.
And Tim M, on the blurb that I gave for your book, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, I'm talking about a bar in South Brooklyn frequented by cops that I would go to with Tim Dahl. And sometimes and I wasn't even in South Brooklyn, but I'd say, are there any cops there? If there are, I'm coming. Don't make me come all the way there. My favorite incident being, and he witnessed this, because I have a special relationship with the law, being on the other side of it, but because they just have no idea how I get away with it. I literally made one cop cry within 30 seconds. It was a beautiful thing.
You know this place, Costello's, the Clatta Inn?
Where is it?
It's Quinton Road and Nostrand.
No, I'm ashamed to say I do not. That's not one of mine.
Can't know them all.
That's pretty far inland for me.
Oh, yeah. So you're closer. Yeah. Bay Ridge. Yeah.
I've spent my entire life hugging the shoreline just in case.
Soccer Tavern. That's not so rough. That's just.
No, but that's a pretty interesting place. The Soccer.
It is. It is. Yeah.
What's really interesting is right around the corner, you had the Danish Athletic Club, which unfortunately has folded. But on the same block is the really tucked away under the radar Swedish football club, which on paper is a private club. So everybody smokes in there, and it is very Scandinavian vibe for a place that's mostly Puerto Rican and Dominican bikers.
Well, that's now because like Bay Ridge, South coastal, Southwest Brooklyn that was the first Scandinavian immigrant wave went through there. Leif Erikson Drive, it's and Soccer Tavern. I heard was originally a Norwegian bar, then it was Irish bar. Now it's Chinese, and they call a lot of the Chinese that work and go there Chirish because they kind of appropriated a lot of the Irish working class. Intonation.
They've taken over the Dart League, and they're doing wonderfully out of that bar.
Although the place that Lydia and I went to, there was a bartender named Bill Emer who was a champion dart player in the whole bar league scene.
Was he?
And I think he claims he made what?
He did win. He did win, but I do believe, I don't know if I threatened to throw a dart at him or maybe I just won an 8-ball against myself. I did get everybody free drinks that one night.
That's right. But you're more of the pool shark that night. Bill Emer claims he made like the amateur Vegas Final Four at darts. And I said, well, what happened? He goes, the fucking Brits. You can't beat the fucking Brits. They always fucking win. That's what he said.
Now I can't say sadly, but I'm in a neighborhood mostly dominated by firemen, which I don't have the same fetish for as I do for the men in blue, just because I like pulling their chains and have more gun training than they do. I don't know. It's just the way I am. When did you start were you writing all along? I mean, you're working. And by the way, this is something that I think really we need to talk about, because most musicians, and certainly almost all writers, they have to have day jobs for most of their life. People don't understand that. Hubert Selby had a job as an accountant when I met him in the early 80s. I'm like, this was one of the greatest American novelists working a frickin' day job. Never been paid for a spoken word gig until I took him on tour. I was horrified.
I'm horrified. I never knew that. For me, you know, I had a lot of really grand bohemian dreams as a teenager, and I certainly envisioned a certain kind of life. But if I haven't mentioned it, I'm Irish. And, you know, the Irish Holy Trinity is jobs, benefits, pension. And it is a difficult siren song to ignore if you want to live in relative comfort in this town. So at some point when I had dropped out of college and I was moving through a series of jobs that, as I mentioned in one of the essays, as long as you could pick up heavy objects or drive a car, you could earn a living. And in those days, you could earn a living that allowed you to live here. So I ran through a lot of those jobs, and then I started taking civil service tests, because that would just be something to fall back on. But,
and as we know, I mean, writers and musicians, we don't get pensions. And it's really wise if you get a job at one point. Is why when anybody asks me what advice to, you know, young writers or musicians, I'm like, scientist, architect, doctor, anything but.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened to me. I wound up at age 20, probably 23 or 24 in the Transit Authority. And I worked there as a night watchman for a while, doing overnights.
Where were you stationed?
I was all over the city, because in my early days, I was what was called RDO relief. So I had to cover other people's days off. So I would do 2 days in one location, 2 days in another, and 1 day in the third place.
Meaning what? What were you doing? Were you on the subway? Were you in a station? What were you doing?
It was, again, bear in mind, 1983. You know what the city was like.
I do.
Oh boy.
My two biggest assignments were the Coney Island train yard and the 207th Street train yard.
Oh,
and my job was to make sure no one wrote any graffiti on the trains.
Right. Well, now they just smear women's heads with bags of human feces. And I mean, that's even harder to, you know, find that one suspect. That,
you know,
ridiculous.
One of my kind of 23-year-old nights out on the town, I ended up asleep on a subway car in the Coney Island train yard. Somehow they didn't kick me off. I don't know how that happened, but it was like 5 a.m. and I was like, where am I? And, I obviously drank a lot that night, and somehow managed to get off, but I don't know how the hell I wasn't kicked off before I ended up there. But
because back in those days, there weren't a whole lot of rules. I mean, before I was a night watchman, I also had a lost evening where I remember I went to see Jim Carroll at a club called Trax up on 72nd Street. It was TRAXX.
I remember that. And by the way, Jim Carroll, for those that are too young to know, great poet. One of his best songs was "This Is for the People Who Have Died." Yeah, he was fantastic, Jim Carroll. Go ahead.
Well,
so you went to Trax.
I went to that show, and I got on the D train to go home, and I almost immediately, let's be kind and say, fell asleep. And the next thing I know, I'm sort of jolted awake, and the train is pulling into 34th Street. And I said, oh, thank God, I only slept for 2 stops, 34th Street. Thank God, I'm doing great. And then they said, next stop, 42nd Street.
Oh boy.
So I had gone up to Coney Island, and
Coney
I was on the way back to the Bronx.
And by the way, the D train now has just been described, at least by the Guardian Angels, if you want to believe anything they say, as one of the most dangerous subway lines, but mostly at the far, yes, the D at the far end of the upper end,
the Bronx,
yes.
or whatever. Yeah.
Yes,
because
yes.
also the D line has changed. I mean, for a while is where the Q is now.
I want to go back to Coney Island for a minute because I spent a lot of time in Coney Island, but mostly on the Cyclone doing acid. Lots of times. Yeah, fun. So back to, when did you start writing? So you had Bohemian Dreams. You knew who Jim Carroll was. Let's go back to like your early introduction to literature or music as a teenager. What's saving you from the Brooklyn Irish dilemma?
I was really lucky. I went to high school in Manhattan and Chelsea. So I was there from 72 to 76. And those were good years to be there. And it was the downside of it is it was Catholic, it was all boys, and it was military. But
my dream to open one day.
Was there a molester? Was there a molester angle there too?
Only what I heard about in retrospect. I was blissfully ignorant at the time.
Okay.
You were one of the few spared. So you're going to high school in Chelsea around the time that I'm landing in Chelsea, going to see Suicide.
Well, I wish I had been smart enough to tip to Suicide back then. I was not.
Well,
I was a little behind the curve in that one.
So what are you into as a teenager to break out of this Catholic boys' school? I mean, what a nightmare! What a nightmare!
I got lucky in that I had a good friend in high school named Robert Morales, and he is unfortunately no longer with us. He passed away at a young age at 54. But when we were young in high school, freshman, sophomore, I was reading science fiction like every teenage boy does. And Bob and I used to cut school and go over to the science fiction shop in the village and wait for new issues of the pulps to come out. And then around age 16, he turned me on to Raymond Chandler. And he had gone over to reading crime stories and starting with the classics, and it changed my life. And it was when I realized I wanted to write.
Not only write, but get into the justice system eventually.
Yep. Well, that was just a fortunate coincidence, but yes.
So it starts with Raymond Chandler. And where do you go from there? Because it's like an album leads to another 100 albums. And it's the same with the book. It leads to, 10 other authors.
Yeah. Well, Chandler, led me through all of James Cain and Hammett and everybody. And then I started buying the contemporary writers at the time in the 70s who were coming out. Robert Parker and the crime writers that were starting to publish then. And then RJ, when we got out of high school, he got a job at the Village Voice, and then he got a job at Heavy Metal Magazine. And God bless him, he was a great source of information.
Your mentor.
Very much so. So by the time I'm tipping to, Hubert Selby and Gilbert Sorrentino, and you realize that it's okay to write about this kind of world, that's because I'd never read that before. I'd never seen anyone do it. So it was astonishing. And I don't think I was up to assaulting the Citadel, but I wanted to try to climb a little bit of that same mountain.
Thing with Selby is it took him, let's just review for a minute. He's absolutely my hero. 15 years old, merchant Marines, tuberculosis, one lung, starts to write a few years later, Last Exit to Brooklyn, writes it twice, has somebody like overlooking it. 7 years it took. And then like The Room took 6 months, and then The Demon and Requiem for a Dream, which is just a master. It's a nervous breakdown on page. The movie is great too. And then his last book, 16 years, it took to write. It was not his best one. He said it was The Ghost in the Doorway prevented him from doing that. And Selby too, along with Henry Miller, they were my greatest literary inspirations because however slightly fictionalized it is, it's real. It's the real shit. And I feel the same way with with your book, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, that look, some of it's fiction, some of it's nonfiction. I don't care to draw the line because to me, it's all very real because you're giving voice to the people that live in that environment.
Oh, thank you. That's I'm thrilled because that's certainly what I was shooting for. You know, the two things that I think I try to do is make a record of my little corner of the universe in a way that nobody has. And the other one is, you know, sort of the essence of, I'm more in the fiction stories, I guess. The essence of noir is not people who are evil, it's people who have made bad choices or who have simply been unlucky on a given day. And bouncing around New York in the years that we were teenagers in New York, you came close to having a very different kind of life if one thing goes wrong one night. And so I like to tell stories to make people be a little bit less judgmental about people who've made those wrong decisions.
Well, I myself don't regret a single goddamn choice I've ever made, even though some might have thought they were certainly happy they were not put themselves in that position, but that's just the way it is. It's the way I was. So where do we go from there?
No, it's not. It's the way you still are.
Thank you very much. The difference between me and most people is I will tell my truth, but I will not get busted for it or censored yet or canceled. I cancel the audience before they cancel me. Go ahead, Tim Dahl.
Did you ever run into any of your, I don't know, court police peers? Did you ever get in trouble where suddenly you're on the other side and you're dealing with people that you knew your professional side?
No, I think what I certainly dealt with was plenty of people I grew up with.
Right.
You know, there were lots of people that would come into the lobby and would, you know, I'd hear, "Hey, Tim," and I'd be just like, "Ah, shit, no." So there was no shortage of that. There was no shortage of getting phone calls from friends' parents because, you know, Billy got locked up last night. So that, you know, that always kind of went with the territory. But that's mostly what I dealt with.
What about some of the legendary criminal lawyers? I mean, did you befriend some of these kind of folk heroes, quote unquote?
I had a cordial relationship with a number of them. I don't think I was friendly with anybody that was very high profile. I was certainly friendly enough with a lot of the legal aid lawyers, but they were the guys and the women that were only just keeping all the balls in the air, you know, doing the best they could, trying to get people into programs, keeping things moving.
It must have been really difficult because, you know, the same reason I have this, you know, I fetishize the police force, including going to the World Police and Fire Games. We'll talk about more of that later off. We don't need to go into that further, but is that people don't understand how difficult it is being within a system, which first of all, we are the cops. We have, you know, more incarceration than anywhere on the planet. The prison system is fucked. Then we have so much corruption on other levels, like who decides what the law is. The incarceration for petty crimes is so bullshit. Yet we have people being arrested 47 times and not going to prison. It's just it's so fucked up. I mean, and then there you are seeing corruption from both sides, and then, you know, incarceration and inconvenience and an expense laid out from people that are doing something really freaking petty. I mean, and you stayed in that system for 30 years, and it's a good fucking thing you wrote about it.
Yeah, one of the weird things that came to me when I became the cashier, first of all, in lower criminal court, was what an odd thing it is to find poor people. You know, what a strange punishment to impose on poor people. And no matter the crime, if people are already in court because they've committed crimes and they're dirt poor, and you impose fines on them, you're telling them to go out and work harder. You're telling them to go commit more crimes.
Yeah, it's interesting because like in Norway, for instance, if you commit a crime or even just a traffic violation, they run your ID and they see how much you make a year. And so the punishment's relative. So everyone feels it the same way. If you're a gazillionaire, it pinches you equally as hard as if you're really poor. Although in Norway there's not much poverty, but still,
the prisons are pretty deluxe there compared to what we have to deal with here.
Yeah, you can take a walk in the park and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting how you would think it's just not working. You can see why it's not really working.
Yeah, most of the people that I dealt with over my entire career, the overwhelming majority were simply lost souls. There were certainly bad guys, but statistically, the bad guys are 10% of the population getting arrested. So honestly, we would be so much better served by getting people into programs. And if you get people who deserve to be punished, give them prison sentences, send them to jail. But, again, I don't think you should be getting somebody who is caught shoplifting and give them $1,000 fine.
Well, I always like to mention this, that, for instance, in Austria, if you steal food, if you're hungry, somebody should give you something to eat. It's really not a crime. And just we know how unjust the whole injustice system is here from the top down. More prisoners than anywhere on the planet. I spent a lot of, after Bill Clinton 3 strikes you're out bullshit, I spent a lot of time talking about prison as the white Angela Davis at that point, and was just horrified at the statistics. But it's just a reflection of, it's just a smaller incrementation of the military industrial complex that we are. And also, once prisons became privatized, the problem with prison is, first of all, it's modern slavery, go make our license plates, et cetera, et cetera. Teach people better ways of dealing, which they don't. Give them some reformative skills, which are, minimal. Don't feed them crap. And and look, there are no doubt there is a number of mentally disturbed, absolutely irreparable, violent criminals, but it can't be all of them 3 million we have in prison right now. And Bill Clinton, seeming to be a nice guy, actually was a freaking asshole, like so many of the other presidents we've had or politicians, and no respect for human life and the massive amount of poverty that this country exists in, which causes a lot of the crime.
I agree with you 100%. No matter how you look at it, and I don't even feel like it's a political statement. I do not believe that the founding fathers of this country, with all of their flaws, envisioned putting people in prison for profit, in private prisons, to have a business, an industry that profits off of it, because you immediately turn people into product. They are your product, no matter what you're selling.
Well, they literally couldn't envision it, because the modern prison system, the one erected or the one designed for the 20th century, kind of didn't really resemble the ones of the past. Not that they were necessarily walks in the park.
Look, I don't think any prisons, I think there are very few examples of how prisoners, quote unquote, criminals should be treated. I mean, the whole system has to be totally complete, but it's like almost every system in America, which is so perverted compared to what they think what they propagandize that they're doing compared to what is really in existence. And, just watching the Supreme Court debate today, for instance, and talking again about, Guantanamo Bay and the latest justice who they're trying to get in there is Lindsey Graham, of course, that
piece Mongol,
of shit. That whatever, Lindsey Grand Central Station, bringing up Guantanamo Bay, because he seems to think that you should just be able to incarcerate people indefinitely, which means now for decades, without having a trial, which is absolute bullshit.
It's terrifying.
And I mean, look, as we know that I am the liver of this country, and I have many complaints about how it's run out, that I'm a solutionist. I'm just saying.
Okay, Tim. Well, so Tim, all right, we've all expressed our compassion and our criticism of the system. Tell us about the actual real bad guys. I mean, was there anyone that you actually saw that was, holy shit, this person's fucking dangerous, this person's really terrifying? Anything that sticks in your brain that you remember?
Oh, sure. There were enough of those. I prefer the ones that I was very fortunate, as I've said in other places, because I did my entire career in criminal court, or the criminal term of Supreme Court. So for the most part, I only dealt with professionals, and that's a bit of a comfort. because if you worked in places like family court, you got people that actually hated each other.
Right.
You know, domestic violence cases, you got very antagonistic divorces, you got child support cases, and things would get violent quickly. Whereas in criminal, for the most part, the people that were getting caught on a regular basis, and they wanted what we wanted, which was to get in, to get out, to go home. And even the incarcerated defendants wanted to get back to C-74 on Rikers Island so they didn't miss lunch. So for the most part, you were dealing with that sort of institutional momentum. But having said that, there would always be moments. One day I remember collecting fines from a sort of mini crew, these Jamaican guys that were all busted for selling ganja. Again, we're back in the mid-'80s. It was a much bigger deal. And the obvious leader of the group was this one little guy that was standing in front. And as I was calling everyone's name, he would pull this enormous wad of money out of his pocket and hand each of them like $400 or $500, which they would then come up and pay me. And
wow,
while I'm waiting for this to happen, this one sort of neighborhood, you know, Bensonhurst, Tony Monero kind of guy comes in, who is waiting to pay his fine for a suspended license. And he's watching this and he's sort of, you know, hopping around a little and getting a little bit frustrated. And at one point, as we're getting toward the end of the list of names, I have 7 names in this roster, I call one name out and nobody answers. And I call it again and nobody answers. And I said, okay, well, you know, one of you guys is missing and nobody's talking. They're all just staring at me. And because I'm stupider than most people, I said, well, you know, he's going to get a warrant issued today. So if he doesn't come, you know, to us, we're going to go find him. And one guy in the back said, bring a shovel.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden, the guy waiting to pay the fine wasn't so frustrated anymore. And he was just fine with waiting.
Whoa.
There you go.
Wow. Not to just be bar name dropping here. Dixie's, Avenue M and Coney Island Avenue. Did you ever go there?
I know Dixie's, or I knew Dixie's.
That could be pretty interesting sometimes.
Yeah. There used to also be a place on Coney Island Avenue called the 1030 Club that was actually run by a retired cop. That was one of the 2 cops in Batman and Robin.
What was that? Was that like it turned into a strip club later? Was that upstairs?
No, you're thinking of the Chesterfield Lounge. But I mean, I've heard. I don't know. I heard stories.
Okay.
Tim McLoughlin, new book out, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, on the same label that publishes some of my books. Akashic. Johnny Temple knows what he's doing. Jerry Stahl's new book is also coming out on that. Michael Imperioli's book is out on that. Tim McLoughlin and I are going to be at Greenlight Books in discussion April 7th. Is that the Fulton Street one? I do believe. I think so. They can look it up. And we're going to talk more about this and all the rest. I'm going to send you a story. You know, I don't write fiction very rarely, but I have a fiction piece I'm going to send you from a male prisoner's point of view. I'm going to send that to you right now when we get off this. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim McLoughlin, and Tim Dahl. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim. Real quickly, because I wanted to get this in. Did you ever go back to the Irish masters? I mean, you're talking about, you know, a lot of people who are more contemporary, but like the James Joyces and Yeats and all that stuff.
I have, but I would be lying if I said that it was an extraordinary influence. I recognize
Sure.
what it is, and it's a tough.
Yeah, you know what it is. It's impossible to read.
That
All right,
is
thank
a bit of a challenge.
Okay, thank you very much. See you soon. I'm sending you something. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Excellent.
Nice meeting you. Yes.
Very nice to meet you.